The man who owned half of Briar Falls asked Wren Cutter what it felt like to wash dishes for a living, and he did it loud enough that the whole dining room of the Callaway Hotel went quiet. She had been standing 3 feet behind Sheriff Tate Dunmore when it happened. Not hiding behind him, she'd been reaching past him for the bread basket, because Mrs. Pollard had asked her to pass it down, and then Edmund Greer's voice cut through every conversation in the room like a knife through warm butter. "Tell me, Sheriff," Edmund said, swirling his glass of imported bourbon, "does it embarrass you, bringing the laundry girl to Harmon's dinner table?" Tate didn't move, didn't turn. His hand was still resting on the back of Wren's chair from where he'd pulled it out for her not 10 minutes ago, and he just left it there, steady as stone. "Edmund," he said, "the only person embarrassing anyone at this table is you." Someone inhaled sharply. Wren thought it might have been Harmon Pollard himself, the man who'd invited them both. She didn't look around to check. She was watching Edmund Greer's face, the way the smile didn't quite know whether to stay or go. "She takes in washing," Edmund said again, softer this time, like softening it made it less of what it was. "She does," Tate said, "and she does it better than anyone in this county. Now, I believe you were talking about the railroad survey before I sat down. You want to keep going, or are we done with the part where you make yourself look small?" Edmund Greer looked at Tate Dunmore for a long moment. Then he looked at Wren. Then he picked up his fork. The table started breathing again. But Wren had already decided something. Sitting in that chair, in her best dress with her hands folded quiet in her lap, she had decided she was going to find out exactly what Edmund Greer had done to her father's land. And she was going to prove every last word of it. She had come to Briar Falls 3 months before that dinner, in the back of a freight wagon, with $42 and a bundle of her mother's good sheets. Her name was Wren Cutter, and she was 24 years old, and she had never been anywhere in her life except Harlow Creek, a town 12 miles east that didn't even have a proper post office. She'd come because of the letter. Her father, Daniel Cutter, had written it 4 weeks before he died. Written it with the kind of careful handwriting a man uses when he knows he doesn't have much time left and wants to be understood. He'd left her everything he had, which was 32 acres of bottomland on the Sallow River, and a small house that needed its roof repaired. The land had been in the Cutter family since before Wren was born. Her grandfather had cleared it. Her father had farmed it. And when she arrived in Briar Falls with his will and his deed and his surveyor's records in a flat leather case tucked under her arm, she went straight to the county land office and found out that the land was already registered to someone else. The clerk, a man named Doyle who wore his belt too high and his suspenders too tight, told her there must be a mistake. "There's no mistake," Wren said. She set the leather case on his counter and opened it. "Here is the deed. Here is the survey from 1881. Here is my father's will, witnessed by Reverend Stills of Harlow Creek, and signed in front of 2 other men I can name. The land belongs to me." Doyle studied the papers the way a man studies something he already knows he's going to send away. "Be that as it may," he said, "the current registration shows the land transferred to the Greer Timber Company in March of this year, signed over fair and legal. My father died in February," Wren said. Doyle said nothing. "He died in February," she said again, slower. "He could not have signed anything in March." What Doyle said next was that she could file a dispute, but it would take time, and she'd need a lawyer. And the nearest lawyer who handled land cases was in Mabry, 40 miles west, and he didn't know his schedule. Wren closed her leather case and thanked him and walked out into the main street of Briar Falls. She stood there for a moment in the April light with a smell of sawdust on the air from Greer's mill at the north end of town, and she understood for the first time in her life what it meant to be completely alone. Then she found the laundry house. It belonged to a woman named Nettie Oakes, who was 61 years old and had a bad hip that kept her from working the washboards herself anymore. Nettie needed help. Wren needed rent money, a place to sleep, and enough time to figure out what had happened to 32 acres her family had bled for. They made a deal on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Thursday Wren was elbow-deep in other people's shirts. She didn't mind the work. She'd worked her whole life. What she minded was the way the town looked at her. Not unkindly, mostly, just with that particular smallness that people extend to someone who does the kind of labor that keeps everything running but nobody wants to think about. She was the laundry girl. She learned quickly what that meant in a town like Briar Falls, where Edmund Greer's timber company employed 1/3 of the male population, and his money touched every building on the main street. It meant she didn't matter. Or at least, that's what Edmund Greer had clearly decided. She first met Tate Dunmore in her third week in town, when she came to file a formal written dispute with the county. He was in the land office for an unrelated reason. Something about a property line near the north pasture belonging to one of the ranching families, and he was the one who held the door for her on the way in, and then stood quietly to the side while she argued with Doyle for 20 minutes. She hadn't spoken to him. She hadn't expected anything from him. When she turned to leave, the case was worse than when she'd come in. Doyle had told her the dispute might take 6 to 8 months to even be reviewed, and she was so focused on not showing how frightened she was that she nearly walked into the doorframe. "Miss," Tate said. She stopped. "I heard most of that," he said. He was tall and sun-lined, maybe 35, with a badge on his chest and the kind of quiet that isn't empty. "What you're describing, a transfer dated after a death, that's not a paperwork issue. That's fraud." "I know," Wren said. "You have all the original documents?" "I have everything." He nodded slowly. "Harmon Pollard is on the county board. He's an honest man. It might be worth asking for a meeting." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Tate thought about it for a moment like it was a genuine question. "Because Doyle won't," he said. That was the whole of it. He didn't offer to help further. He didn't make promises. He just told her one true thing and let her decide what to do with it. She thought about that for a long time afterward. The dinner at the Callaway Hotel was Harmon Pollard's idea. He'd invited 6 people to discuss the proposed railroad survey that would pass through the eastern part of the county, and he'd invited Wren because he'd met with her the week before and read her documents and told her quietly that what she had was serious, and he wanted her at the table so that Tate could hear the full situation from her directly. Because Tate Dunmore was the only law in Briar Falls, and Harmon trusted him more than he trusted the county judge. Wren had borrowed a dress from Nettie Oakes. It was a good dress, dark green with pearl buttons, and it fit well enough. She'd done her hair up properly and worn her mother's earrings, the small garnet ones that had come all the way from Pennsylvania. She'd known Edmund Greer would be there. She hadn't known he would open his mouth within the first 10 minutes. After the table settled back into conversation, careful, deliberate conversation, the kind that happens when a room full of people has just decided to pretend something didn't happen. Harmon Pollard turned the discussion to the railroad survey, and then, almost seamlessly, to land records in the eastern portion of the county, and then, with the gentle skill of a man who has run meetings all his life, to the particular question of the Cutter parcel on the Sallow River. Edmund Greer went very still. "I purchased that land legally," he said. He wasn't looking at Wren. He was looking at Harmon. "From the estate Mr. Cutter died February 9th, Wren said before anyone could stop her. The transfer is dated March 14th. His estate was never probated. No executor was appointed. There is no legal mechanism by which any transfer could have occurred. Perhaps the paperwork was finalized after. A dead man cannot sign a deed," Wren said. The room went quiet again, different from before. This time it was the quiet of people paying attention. Tate Dunmore, who had said nothing since Edmund's first remark, set down his fork. "Edmund, who notarized the transfer document?" Edmund looked at him. "I don't recall offhand." "I do," Wren said. She opened the small leather case she'd brought and laid 3 sheets of paper on the table. "The notary signature on the March transfer belongs to a man named Ira Potts, who operates out of Delwood, 20 miles north. Mr. Potts's registration with the county lapsed in December. He was not a valid notary in March. This document is not legally notarized, which means the transfer is not valid, which means the land still belongs to my father's estate, which means it belongs to me." She had practiced that. Every word of it, alone in Nettie's back room, with the papers spread on the narrow bed and a candle burning low. She'd set it to the wall until she could say it without her voice shaking. It didn't shake now either. Edmund Greer looked at her for the first time all evening, not with contempt this time, with something colder. "You've been busy," he said. "Yes," Wren said, "I have." What happened next didn't happen all at once. That's the thing they never tell you about justice. It doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives the way water works on stone, slow and patient and inexorable, until one day the stone isn't there anymore. Harmon Pollard called for a formal county review. He had the authority to do it, and he did it the morning after the dinner, with a written request filed before Edmund Greer had finished his breakfast. Tate rode to Delwood to find Ira Potts. Wren went back to the laundry house and washed 14 shirts and a set of curtains for the Beaufort family. and she didn't stop shaking until the third shirt was done. Then she was all right. Ira Potts, it turned out, was not a difficult man to find. He was a difficult man to embarrass, which is different. When Tate sat down across from him in the small office above the feed store in Delwood, Potts tried to claim he didn't remember the specific document. Tate laid a copy of it on the desk between them and asked him to look again. Potts looked. His jaw moved without making sound. "Your registration had lapsed," Tate said. "You knew that when you signed it." "Greer's man came to me," Potts said finally. "Said it was a simple transfer, family property, all agreed on. I didn't ask questions." "Who was Greer's man?" Potts gave a name. Tate wrote it down. The name was Clive Hatch, and Clive Hatch was Edmund Greer's personal secretary. And when Tate returned to Briar Falls and went to find Clive Hatch had already left town. His rooms above the mill office were cleared. His landlady said he'd taken the southbound stage at first light. Edmund Greer spent 2 days telling anyone who'd listen that Wren Cutter was a confused girl who'd gotten the wrong idea about a routine land transaction. He said it at the barber shop. He said it at the bank. He said it to 3 members of the county board individually, in what Harmon Pollard later described to Wren as a campaign that would have been impressive if it hadn't been quite so obvious. What Edmund Greer had not counted on was Gerald Oakes. Gerald Oakes was 73 years old and had lived in Briar Falls his whole life, and he sat on the county board, and he had a memory like a courthouse wall, dense and full and nearly impossible to shake. He also, as it happened, owned the parcel directly north of the Cutter land, and when Harmon Pollard brought the survey records to the board meeting, Gerald Oakes studied them for a long time and then said, very quietly, that his own northern fence line appeared to have shifted on the Greer Timber Company's filed maps. The board meeting went on for 4 hours. Wren sat outside on the bench in the county hall corridor, with her leather case on her lap and her hands folded, and she waited. Nettie Oakes had offered to come with her, but Wren had said no. Nettie's hip was bad and the bench was hard, and there was no point in both of them hurting. So she sat alone, and she listened to the muffled voices behind the door, and she didn't let herself hope too hard because she'd learned early that hoping too hard was a kind of spending, and she needed to keep her reserves. At 2 in the afternoon, Harmon Pollard came out and sat down next to her. He didn't say anything right away. He took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "The board has voted to void the March transfer," he said, "on the grounds that the notarization was invalid and no legal basis for the transfer exists. The Cutter parcel reverts to the estate of Daniel Cutter to be administered by his named heir." He paused. "That's you." Wren nodded. She wasn't sure she could speak. Additionally, Harmon said Gerald Oakes has filed a separate complaint regarding what appears to be an irregular survey on his northern boundary. That's going to open a separate investigation. I suspect we'll be finding a few more irregularities before it's done. He put his hat back on. "Edmund Greer has been asked not to leave the county." Wren pressed her lips together. "You did good work," Harmon said. "That notary detail, I wouldn't have caught that. Half the lawyers in the state wouldn't have caught that. My father taught me to read documents carefully," Wren said. Her voice was steady. "He said you never sign what you can't explain." Harmon nodded. "Smart man." "He was," she said. She went back to the laundry house and told Nettie. Nettie cried, which surprised Wren, because Nettie was not a woman who cried easily. Then Nettie made a pot of coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table, and Wren let herself feel it. All of it, the fear she'd been carrying since the freight wagon, the ache of the February morning she'd buried her father in frozen ground, the particular loneliness of being invisible in a town that belonged to someone else's money. She let herself feel it, and then she set it down. Tate came by that evening. He knocked on the doorframe because the door was standing open to let in the late air. "Heard the news," he said. "Come in," Nettie said from the kitchen, before Wren could answer. He sat at their table and drank Nettie's coffee, and Wren told him about the survey on Gerald Oakes's land, and what Harmon thought it might mean, and Tate listened the way he always listened. Completely, without interrupting, the way that made a person feel like what they were saying mattered. "How many other parcels do you think he touched?" Wren asked. "I don't know yet," Tate said. "But I'm going to find out." He looked at her when he said it. Not the way Edmund Greer had looked at her, calculating, diminishing, but the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely glad is on the same side of a thing. She looked back. "I want to help," she said. "With the investigation, I can read the documents. I know what I'm looking for now." Tate thought about it for a moment. "Officially, the board handles it. I know. "Unofficially," he said. "Harmon Pollard has a habit of accidentally leaving survey files in the county hall reading room with no one watching." Nettie made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I see," Wren said. "The investigation took 6 weeks. Wren spent most of them at the long table in the county hall reading room, cross-referencing survey records against original deeds, against notary registrations, against transfer dates, while outside the window Briar Falls went about its business. She became a fixture there, the way useful things become fixtures, quietly, without ceremony. The clerk Doyle stopped looking at her the way he had in April. He started leaving the relevant boxes on the table before she arrived. She found 4 other parcels, 4 families whose land records had been quietly adjusted in the Greer Timber Company's favor over the preceding 3 years, 2 of them involving the same lapsed notary, and 1 of them involving a deed that appeared to have been retyped entirely. The same document in a slightly different typeface, the kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't looking, the kind you couldn't miss once you were. She brought everything to Harmon Pollard in a single organized folder with a cover sheet she'd written out in her father's careful handwriting style, because that's what he would have done. Harmon read it in one sitting, and when he was done, he folded his hands on the desk and looked at her. "You should be a lawyer," he said. Wren had thought about this. She'd thought about it in the reading room, late in the afternoon, with the light coming in sideways and the documents spread around her. She'd thought about whether a woman from Harlow Creek with no schooling past 16 could do such a thing, and she'd decided that those were questions for later. "Maybe I will be," she said. Edmund Greer was formally charged in the first week of July. The charge was fraud, specifically the falsification of land transfer documents and the knowing use of an invalid notary to execute those transfers. His lawyer came from the city and was very good and very expensive, and none of it changed what the documents said. The trial lasted 3 days. Wren testified on the second day. She sat in the witness chair in the Briar Falls courthouse, with the leather case on the table beside her, and answered every question clearly and without hesitation, because she had lived with those documents for 6 weeks, and she knew them better than she knew the layout of the laundry house. When Edmund Greer's lawyer tried to suggest she might have misunderstood the nature of land transfer law, she explained, calmly and in specific terms, exactly why he was wrong. The jury was out for 4 hours. Edmund Greer was convicted. The 4 properties were ordered returned to their rightful owners. The Greer Timber Company's operations were suspended pending further audit. The Briar Falls Courier ran the story on the front page. They described Wren as a local woman with an exceptional grasp of county land law. She cut the article out and sent it to her mother's sister in Pennsylvania, who wrote back that she wasn't surprised, that the Cutter family had always had hard heads and good sense. In September, Wren took the first steps toward reading for the law. Harmon Pollard knew a judge in the county seat who took apprentices sometimes, who believed, quietly, without making speeches about it, that the law was better when more people understood it. He wrote her a letter. The judge's name was Arthur Fells, and he was 67 years old and had been on the bench for 22 years. And when Wren sat across from him in his office and explained what she'd done with the Cutter land case, he asked her 3 questions about the specific statutes involved and then said she could start Monday. She went back to Briar Falls and told Nettie. "Well," Nettie said, "I suppose I'll need to find someone else for the washboards." "I'll find you someone good," Wren said. "I know you will." Nettie looked at her over the coffee pot. "You going to be all right, girl, out there on your own?" Wren thought about the 32 acres on the Sallow River, which she had not yet been able to go see, because she'd been too busy proving they were hers. She thought about her father's handwriting on the deed. She thought about the reading room in the county hall, and the particular satisfaction of finding the truth inside a document. Most specific joy of a thing that couldn't be argued with, because it was simply true. She thought about Tate Dunmore sitting at Nettie's kitchen table, listening. "Yes," she said, "I think I will be." She went out to the land on a Sunday morning in early October, the first cool day of the season. She drove herself in a borrowed wagon, and she came down the road that ran along the Sallow River, with the cottonwoods burning yellow on both sides, and she pulled up at the edge of the property and sat for a moment with the reins in her hands. The house needed more than a new roof. The fence line had gone to ruin. The bottom field had been left to grow wild for 8 months, thick with goldenrod and ironweed, and somewhere in the middle of it a stand of young birches had taken hold, that hadn't been there when her father worked the ground. She climbed down from the wagon and walked to the middle of the field and stood there. The river was audible below the tree line, low and steady. A hawk was working the updraft over the far pasture, tilting in slow circles. The goldenrod smelled like the end of summer, warm and slightly sweet, the way everything smells when it's about to turn. She heard the wagon before she saw it, the particular rattle of Tate's rig, which had a loose board in the bed that he kept meaning to fix. He pulled up on the road and got down and walked to the edge of the field. He stopped at the fence line, not crossing it. "Harmon said you were coming out today," he said. "Did he send you to check on me?" "No." He looked at the field. "I sent myself." She looked at him across the goldenrod. He was holding his hat in his hands, which he did sometimes when he was being honest about something. "It's a mess," she said, meaning the land. "It's good land," he said. "The bottomland on the Sallow drains well. Whoever farms this next is going to have a good situation." "I'm not farming it," she said. "I'm going to be a lawyer." "I know," he said. "I meant whoever you sell it to, or rent it to, or hire." He paused. "It's still yours. That's the point." She looked at the hawk again. It had found what it was looking for and was dropping now, fast and clean. "You could come in," she said. "Across the fence. It's my land. I'm allowed to invite people." He smiled, just slightly, the way he smiled when something caught him off guard in a way he didn't mind. He crossed the fence line and walked through the goldenrod until he was standing beside her. They stood there together for a while in the October light, with the river below them, and the hawk gone now into the tree line, and the whole field smelling of the last warmth of the year. Her father had said once that the best thing you could do with a piece of land was understand it. Know its water, know its soil, know what it had given and what it still had to give, and then, if you were lucky, know the right person to stand on it with you, and not say a word that wasn't necessary. The cottonwoods turned in the breeze along the river. Wren Cutter stood on her 32 acres in the October morning, and felt, for the first time since February, like something in her life was exactly where it was supposed to be.